Sanbonani, and welcome to the first Next Level podcast. I am your host, Xolani Mlangeni. In today's episode, we are asking this question: can South Africa's radical left unseat the new coalition government? To help us answer this question, I'll be joined in a moment by my special guest, Gabriel Crouse, fellow at the South African Institute of Race Relations. Before we dive into the topic, we have prepared this insert to lay out the discussion. Can South Africa's radical left unseat the coalition government? The resignation of high-ranking EFF leaders and the defection to the rival Umkhonto weSizwe party poses two critical questions. Firstly, are the defections signaling the beginning of a serious decline for the 12-year-old EFF? Secondly, are these defections a precursor to an inevitable consolidation of South Africa's left, including the EFF and ANC-aligned leftist formations, South African Communist Party and Labour Federation COSATU, with the MK Party the center of power? Will the MK Party resolve its internal infighting and leadership squabbles to be ready to assume leadership of the radical left? The year 2024 was a watershed moment for South African politics that will forever be etched in the country's history. The ANC lost its 30-year outright majority after last year's general elections and was forced into a multi-party power-sharing coalition known as the Government of National Unity. The coalition government is made up of 10 parties, including South Africa's second-largest political party and ANC long-time opposition foe, the Democratic Alliance. The ANC has been losing the support of voters since 2009 after the ruling party's successive administrations failed to address poor service delivery, corruption, porous borders and chaotic immigration, low economic growth, and high unemployment. The ANC's electoral support has plummeted from a peak of 66.35% in 2004 to 40.2% in 2024. Ahead of the 2024 elections, the EFF, MK Party, and African Transformation Movement formed the Progressive Caucus, a radical left-leaning bloc that aims to push socialist policies such as state ownership of land, mines, and banks. But since the formation of ANC-led GNU in July 2024, the Progressive Caucus is yet to turn up the heat in Parliament on the GNU, which is accused of serving the interests of big business. Political commentators have attributed the faint-heartedness of the Progressive Caucus in challenging the GNU to tensions between EFF and MK Party, as well as infighting within the MK Party. There is speculation that suspended MK Party General Secretary Floyd Shivambu may leave the party less than a year after joining it. He is expected to establish a new party. On its end, the GNU is not without challenges. It faces a list of long-standing and unresolved challenges such as a stagnant economy, high levels of economic inequality, and high unemployment. Since 2009, the economy has grown at an average annual rate of 1.14%, while unemployment rate jumped to 20.5% in 2009 to 32.1% currently. If the broader measure of unemployment, which includes discouraged job seekers, is applied, unemployment has jumped to 46.6% currently from 28.6% in 1994. This means that more than 12 million South Africans can't find jobs. Now the question is, can the radical left unseat the GNU in 2029 if it fails to fix the economy? Or will the tensions between its key members, EFF and MK Party, derail its ambitions? The next 4 years will give us clues to these vexing questions. At the time of the release of this podcast, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi was the latest EFF leader to resign from the party. He left politics to join Johannesburg-based radio station Power FM as a talk show presenter. Cape Town City Councillor Lungiswa Ntshuntshe defected from the EFF to join the DA. Perhaps we must start this discussion by asking this question, which is in the minds of many South Africans. Do you think the controversial defection of key EFF members, Floyd Shivambu, Zwanele Manyi, Dali Mpofu, Busisiwe Mkhwebane, and Alfred Motsi to the MK Party would lead to the demise of the EFF and may have fractured the Progressive Caucus?
It is possible, but I think at this stage it is unlikely that this will lead to the end of the EFF. There are two reasons for that. The first is that the EFF leader, Julius Malma, is an extremely charismatic figure. He is very positively regarded in polling by a minority. It's a small minority of the population, but those who regard him positively have very intense positive feelings towards him. The second is that the EFF brand has a similar level of commitment. Around 10% of the population shows somewhat positive attitudes, and 5% of the population, 10% of the adult voting age population, really has a lot of enthusiasm for the EFF. Figures like Ndlozi, Shivambu, Mpofu, Kwebane, Notsi, they have a following too, but none of them have the name brand recognition. None of them have the personal connection to voters that Malema has. Also, they can't compete with the EFF itself as a brand. If you look back over the last 10 years, the EFF has lost some of its senior figures along the way. Many of its financial treasurers have resigned with big complaints, and it hasn't really damaged the party. So this will damage the party,
Yes,
but I don't think it'll destroy the party. The second question is, will it fracture the radical left? I think maybe, but maybe not. In terms of policy, the laws that they want, the vision that they have for the country, I think MK and the EFF are quite close. Same WhatsApp group, in a sense. So I see this more as a family feud. People that share a lot of vision, share a lot of personal connections. There have been some personality clashes, some outlook clashes, but I think they're still trying to pull in the same direction. And I think if they get the chance to, they would collaborate to come back into government, perhaps as soon as 2026.
Yes, and of course you've mentioned that there are challenges with the left, and of course it is currently fragmented and disjointed at the moment. The socialist camp is diverse and has some less radical derivatives in its ranks, such as SACP and COSATU, which tend to stay clear of land expropriation and nationalization debates while resisting any attempts by the government to privatize bankrupt state-owned entities. If the left were to consolidate, do you think the moderate left will disappear in South Africa and only the radical left will remain?
I think that probably is what would happen if there was a full left consolidation at this point. The radical left that wants expropriation without compensation, that wants full redistribution, that doesn't really believe in growing the economy, that believes much more in cutting it up and reparceling it out. That faction has a much more charismatic leadership presence, and it's got a much stronger legacy of intellectually injecting its ideas into the body politic in the academy, universities, in parts of the media space. The reason for that is during the struggle against apartheid, a kind of radical vision was very appealing. Moderates had tried for decades to speak reasonably with the apartheid leaders and were basically ignored. And so a more radical mood took over and bore fruit. But there's momentum in politics. And the thing that worked in the last war doesn't necessarily work in this war, but the generals will want to fight in the same strategy in any case because it's what they know. So the generals who won the last war, they won it with a more radical line. And I think that is the kind of momentum that's carried over, particularly if you look in MK's top leadership and in the EFFs, the calls that have been made are clear and historically consistent. And the final aspect to that is voters who hear the same message over and over again at least know this is what this politician stands for. The moderates haven't learned how to pick their message and stick to it. If a moderate is wishy-washy and says one thing one day and another thing another day, they lose connection with voters.
let's look at the ANC and its alliance with COSATU and SACP rather, for a moment. The ANC describes itself as a broad church with a diverse congregation that includes capitalists, trade unionists, and communists. Now that the ANC is in the business-friendly GNU, does this mean that the ANC has moved from center-left of our politics to center-right?
I don't think it has moved to the center-right, but I do think that the ANC is maybe beginning the divorce from the SACP. And I think the Communist Party feels the same way. So their Secretary General has said that maybe it's time for the SACP to put itself on the ballot box and see what voters have to say for them. Our polling suggests they would not be very popular. But I should add something. If you look at a guy like David Masondo, the Deputy Finance Minister, he is a member of the SACP and of the ANC. And he recently made comments about prescribed assets, which is a complicated issue, but basically what it is the government wants to take your pension and say how you must invest it. And there's millions and millions of people with pensions in this country. Every government worker, most people in the formal sector have some kind of pension. So it's like 2 trillion rand or 4 trillion rand, depending on how you count, that the government can say, use that money to buy Eskom shares. And some people don't want that to happen, because if you had to buy shares in Eskom, maybe your pension is suddenly going to be worth half as much. And the ANC policy going into the election was, we want to do prescribed assets for the good of the country. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, Masondo was saying, prescribed assets are terrible. You must rather let capitalism do its job, let investor confidence lead the way, let the profit motive drive. The pension fund holders, they are the ones who know the best place to put the money in order to grow the money. So that is a huge change, and it's even coming from a member of the Communist Party. So part of what might happen is that the Communist Party might divorce from the ANC, or the Communist Party might actually in effect cease to exist, because it itself is in a confused state, and I don't know that it has the strength of leadership to survive the current period that we're in, where, to be sure, the ANC is shifting, not a lot, but it is shifting gently and clearly in a more business-friendly direction.
Yes. And I mean, of course, you've mentioned with SACP and them not being as friendly to the general public as, of course, the ANC and EFF. Do you think maybe Soli may come up with a strategy that could perhaps draw people in? I mean, you mentioned Julius Malma being an individual who actually is keeping the EFF alive.
Yeah, I think Soli is an interesting person to talk with, because he's very, I think he's sincere, but I don't think that he is as politically capable as a retail politician as someone like Malema. But in my analysis, the EFF is the youth league of the Communist Party. It calls itself basically the youth league of the ANC. Okay. That's how Malema started it when he was kicked out. But he took the Communist Party's policy program. Their manifesto from the beginning, from 2014, was very clear. We want to nationalize all the land, your house. I don't have a house, but if the viewer has a house, the government must take that house and then decide whether you can stay there or not stay there. That is a communist idea. It was not really an ANC idea until Malema was pushing it from that side. So I think the EFF and the Communist Party could function hand in hand quite effectively. And that is one thing to look out for if the tripartite alliance is to fall apart. The other side of the alliance is COSATU. And I must say, COSATU, I've spent time in Parliament this year, for example, on the procurement legislation. How is 1.2 trillion rand spent? COSATU was one of the sternest critics of the ANC in how they were trying to change the law. Because COSATU was saying, you guys are making this thing even more confusing. There's going to be even more state capture if you do it this way. Cut the red tape, make it simpler. It's very rare for a trade union to say, cut the red tape, make it simpler. But COSATU is doing that because I think it sees how badly state capture has damaged the lives of workers that belong to the union and to their broader families, to their communities where people are unemployed. And so there's a seriousness, there's an effort to get serious in South Africa. And to get serious, I think it does mean splitting the moderate left from the radical left and saying which policies don't work on the radical side and how do you go for a more practical way forward where people can actually make money rather than just take and redistribute.
And for the benefit of our viewers who are not familiar with the different economic ideologies that we are discussing today, what's the difference between left-leaning policies and right-leaning policies?
Great. I think it is not something that gets talked about often enough.
Sure.
In clear terms. So let me just start out by saying, in my opinion, I've studied political science.
Yes.
Every country needs a left and a right. It's your own muscles. If you pull a muscle with your bicep, you are lifting something. At the same time, you are resisting. The other muscle is resisting.
Yes.
If you want to close a door quietly, you use two hands, one to push and one to pull.
100%.
You need a left to push and a right to pull, or a right to push and a left to pull. But in what directions are they pulling? Traditionally, where the phrase came from, the left was pulling for more government spending. The right was pulling for less government spending. The left pulls for more laws to interfere, to protect. The right pushes for less laws, for more freedom, for more room to maneuver. So the simplest way to think about it is tax. Should you increase tax or decrease tax? If you are a left wing, you want to increase tax because you think, okay, it's nice for me to have money, but if the government takes some of my money and takes some of your money and your money and your money, takes all of that money together, it can buy better than I can buy for myself alone. So I want the tax to go up. I know it'll hurt me a little bit to pay more tax, but the advantage will be a stronger state to take care of us all. Whereas the right says, you know what, I'm not making that much money. And now you're taking it from me with this taxing thing, and you're not giving me that much service delivery in exchange for it. So it would be better if you taxed me less. Leave more money in my pocket because I can spend my money better than you can. As a government official, when you spend my money, I don't think you're doing a good job. The pothole is not being filled. The lights are not working. The water is not coming out of the tap. This is where the money is supposed to go, but it's not going there. So rather cut some tax. So that is one way to think, just literally the size of government. Should there be more or should there be less? Should we be taking more from the private sector or less from the private sector? That is a very traditional way of differentiating the left from the right. In South Africa, the ANC has always been left-leaning, as have its tripartite alliance partners. And so too have been almost every other political party on the issue of taxes. So in 2024, not one party said we should cut tax. Not one party said, you know what, the tax is too high in this country, given the service delivery, which is unusual. If you look in middle economies like Mexico, like Brazil, India, countries that are a lot like South Africa. India is poorer than South Africa, but has huge inequality, this kind of thing. In those countries, whenever they have an election, one side is saying more tax, one side is saying less tax. In rich countries like Germany, America, Japan, the same story. But in South Africa, no one is arguing for less tax. So in that sense, no one is right-wing. Everyone is either center or center-left or radical left. And the radical left say, we don't want to just tax you, your income. We also want to take your house and your car and whatever, your assets. And we're not saying we will physically take it away from you, but we want to take the title deed. Then we can decide if you get to stay there as a custodian or not. That's the most radical left position, and it's dangerous. The most radical right position is also dangerous. The most radical right position says, you know what, there should not really be any government. No taxes. Just let people run their own lives. Then there's no money for police. There's no money for schools, for small children, to learn, to grow and become literate members of a society that wants to work together. There's no border security. There's no roads. There's no hospitals for people that are sick and dying to be treated. The radical right and the radical left are very extreme and very noisy. And in between that, there's this challenge to find a good balance. And I think South Africa has not succeeded in finding a good balance, but at least that is a sense of what is the challenge.
One of the criticisms of the GNU by left-leaning forces is that the ANC is partnering in the GNU with the DA, a political party they consider racist. Why is the DA labeled racist in spite of the fact that it was formed by white liberals who oppose apartheid? Isn't there a contradiction in the framing of what the DA is? Can you oppose apartheid and be racist at the same time?
So I think you can oppose apartheid and be racist. And I'll give you a very good example. In 1948, it was the election for apartheid. On the one side was the South African Party, the SAP. On the other side was the National Party. And the National Party, their campaign slogan was, "Vote for us, we are going to implement apartheid." It was not a secret. So the other side was opposing apartheid. And Jan Smuts was the leader, but the deputy, who was the finance minister, Jan Hofmeyr, he was the strongest opponent of apartheid. He said, if you give me a chance, I'm going to make it so that everyone in South Africa who has a house will also have the right to vote. Black, white, Indian, colored, I want everyone to have the chance to vote if they own property. So in that sense, he was very serious about opposing apartheid. Others were more wishy-washy. And yet, Jan Hofmeyr was undoubtedly a racist. He wrote, he said, he believed whites are superior, more clever, more capable at business, and so on and so forth. So it is possible, and it happened. But that being said, from 1948 to the point when the PFP, the Progressive Federalist Party, was founded, things had changed. And Helen Suzman, who founded that party, which then you could say evolved into becoming the Democratic Party around the 90s, which then evolved into becoming the Democratic Alliance in the 2000s. She was not a racist. She was a very sincere believer in the transcendent value of human dignity, that it's something applying equally to you and to me and to everybody else, regardless of race. And that founding value, I think, has carried through that party evolution. I don't say that every DA person, there have been some bad choices and some mistakes have been made. But in general, the party's value, the party's commitment to non-racialism is very long-standing. So then the question is, why are they called racist? Well, I think part of the reason is that when people want to debate big issues like BEE, it's very easy to say either you like BEE or you hate black people. To frame the debate like that, of course, makes it seem as if BEE must be a good thing. And from very early days, the DA criticized BEE. Now, in my opinion, some people criticize BEE because they are racist, because they do hate black people. So you can say that story. I mean, this country had apartheid. We must be serious. There have been serious racists in this country and in big numbers. But there's also another way to criticize it. To say it's not at all because of the color of the skin of people. It's because the way the system is designed, it's bound to fail. And that kind of good faith criticism, if you see it coming as a BE supporter, you see someone coming along with a clever story, a lot of compassion, a lot of statistics, he wants to criticize BE, and you don't know how to debate that guy. The easiest thing to do is to say he's a racist. Or if he's a black guy, to call him a coconut or an Oreo or a traitor of his race or whatever. And often the criticisms are much harsher actually against black DA members than against white DA members. But without getting into that too much in detail, the point that I'm trying to make is I think a lot of that has been bad faith. It's been an effort to distract from the real policy debate. And we really, as South Africans, should, not just that issue, all issues, we should debate seriously, trying to find the smartest voices, trying to think to ourselves in the smartest way, what actually is the right story here? And in that sense, we're in a competition with those who want to debate clearly and those who want to insult their way into grabbing more power. From the right, from the left, from all directions, there are such politicians. And the old Latin word for them is a demagogue. It's someone who dominates by using bullying tactics from high school, from primary school.
South Africa right now is an emerging market mixed economy that is driven by both the public and private sector. But private capital is more dominant than state capital. So while capitalism is a more dominant economic ideology in our country, we have strong strands of Marxist communism in our politics. Given our level of economic development, what economic ideology should we be following, and what role should the state be playing in the economy?
I think the best answer is provided by a guy called Francis Fukuyama. And he's a world-renowned socio-political analyst. And part of what made him famous was in the late 80s. He's the one who saw the end of communism coming. He said, it's about to happen and watch out. And he was right. And he came to South Africa shortly before COVID. And he said, you know what the ideology is you need in South Africa? I'm paraphrasing here. But he said, the ideology you need in South Africa is value for money ideology. When you are thinking about your government, should it be bigger, should it be smaller? This exact left-right definition that I gave comes, he endorses it. He says, you are missing half of the story. The other half of the story is the government high quality or is it low quality? So, and you go department by department. If a government department is able to deliver, you must give it money because people need the things that it's delivering. But if a government department is not able to deliver, then you have to cut some of the money away from that thing to the point where the amount you're spending and what you're getting line up. And it's a hard thing to hear, but I think if you think about how you spend your own money, if you go to a place and you're buying something for 50 Rand, and you're buying lunch or something, and it's a good meal, it's filling you up, it's healthy, you're like, okay, well, 50 Rand's a lot of money, but I'm happy with this. If you spend 50 Rand and you get a packet of crisps, that's a problem. Value for money. So his thing is, just look how much are you spending and how much are you getting in return. That's the equation. And in that way of thinking, in some countries, you'll say, well, maybe we should actually have more government. We should spend more money, more tax, more involvement. In other countries, we should have less. Then he did the numbers, and I'd re-updated those numbers at the start of this year. If you look at the graph of South African, the size of the government relative to all economic activity, it went from about 20% to 40%. So of every Rand that's made in a year, it's now 40 cents go to the government. 20 years ago, it was 20 cents. So the government has, in that sense, doubled in size. It's taking twice as much. So the graph goes up like this. But if you look at the quality as rated by the World Bank of service delivery, we were in 2000, that transition in Mbeki, Mandela, we were in the top 20% in the world. Now it's come down. Now we in the middle of the pack of the whole world. So there's many countries that are worse. Half of the countries are worse, but half are better. And if you look at that rate of decline, it is one of the fastest rates of decline. The ability to handle corruption is the worst because it means you're taking tax, more tax is being taken, and more of it is going to state capture. And when you see that graph making that X of getting the government's taking more money, but it's wasting more money, that take more, waste more thing is what Francis Fukuyama was saying. Your ideology in that situation should be to cut back. Then if you get a good government going, good bureaucracy, good home affairs, whatever, then you can start looking at building it up again, investing more. But first you have to discipline it. When it's in a tax more, take more system, you've got to cut it back.
You've answered a bit of this question, but I'll ask you anyway. Why did the ANC fail to build a capable developmental state that is able to manage its state-owned entities efficiently? Because these companies are crucial for South Africa's infrastructure development and international competitiveness.
Yeah, it's a tough question because there were people in the ANC that really were smart and capable and wanted to do this. I think of Finance Minister Trevor Manuel.
Yes.
And when I was in high school, I learned to read newspapers, reading his explanations of why is he doing this in the budget.
Yes.
What a brilliant guy. And just an example of many ANC loyalists who wanted to build a capable state but failed. One thing you can say is personality. You can say someone like Jacob Zuma came along and he ruined the party. But I think if you say one bad apple, you're only getting a small part of the story. Another thing you can say, a bad apple from private sector, the Guptas or the Ruperts or whatever people like to choose, I think. I think the deeper story is this. When the ANC came to power, for some time, they were able to facilitate a real increase in the standard of living of most South Africans. 3 million jobs were added in the 2000s. More than 12 million houses received piped water and electricity. In the 90s, in the early 90s, for every brick house built in this country, there were 10 shacks built in a year. By 2007, for every shack that was built, there were 10 brick houses being built. So, you know, the oppression of apartheid was being undone. It was a lived thing. People's lives were improving. That was good. And some of the people in the ANC saw, if we keep going this way, we will keep holding on to power. But that same story I was saying of fighting the last war, the moves that the ANC had made in order to achieve that success was appropriate for that time. Then came a new time, and you needed a new strategy. You needed a shift in strategy. And the shift that needed to take place, in my opinion, was one from more state-led development to a more private, greater role for the private sector. The reason that needed to happen was because the ANC had over-accelerated its cadre deployment program. The rate at which people in the civil service, people working for government, Home Affairs, police, army, hospitals, whatever, because the ANC didn't like the old white people working in many of those roles, they drove many of them out. Golden handshakes, retrenchments, very fast cadre deployment to get people in. Not all of them black, some of them white, some of them, but just people with new values. Cadre deployment was initially the idea you want people running the show who love the new South Africa, not the old South Africa. It had a good idea at the start, but it happened too quickly in terms of losing the institutional knowledge, how to run Eskom properly, how to run PRASA, Transnet properly. Then once it had been so quick, of course mistakes will be made. The ANC needed to adjust and say, okay, now we need a bit of time to actually see in this department, who's the bad apple? Jackie Celebi, he's a bad apple. Let's get rid of him. Let's get a good station command, a good chief of police, national commissioner to run the show, regardless of race. But it will take time to figure that out. In the meantime, let the private sector do more to add value. And I can get into practical terms, how the private sector can do more to help the poorest South Africans who are still stuck in the shadow of apartheid. But rather than take that idea up, they thought, you know what worked last year will work next year. And last year what worked was just a little bit more cadre deployment, just a little bit more state involvement, just a little bit more red tape. And then cadre deployment went from this nice idea to this terrible idea. Then the increased tax went from helping the poor to helping a few rich people stuff their pockets. And then things got worse. Then the ANC said, what shall we do? Then they said, well, let's do a little bit more of the same thing, because for us, it's actually working quite nicely. So that vicious cycle started to play out that we've seen in South America, that we've seen in East Asia, in many countries, in Africa as well. And unfortunately, South Africa's democracy has proved resilient. And those party members of the ANC, like Trevor Manuel, that always had the best interest in the country, I think, at heart, have come to the fore in their way and said, now let's try something new. So this year, for the first time, we really are seeing something new. It is not bearing fruit yet, but it's an interesting time to be looking at the political situation for opportunities to grow.
Let's look at the various ideologies. Capitalism, of course, is a dominant economic system all over the world. If it works and is the best economic system, why do we have so many poor countries, particularly in Africa, where there's massive inequality?
Well, I think there's two things. One thing is, for capitalism to really work, you need good governance. So it can never be by itself. You always need regulation. But the other is that the poorest countries in Africa are not capitalist and have never been. So if you take the DRC, for example, before the Belgians came along in the 1880s, the DRC was not one country. And it was technologically not doing very well, because the rainforests, the river systems, the natural diseases coming from pests around there, it was a very hard place to live. Then the Belgians came and did rubber extraction. That colonial extractive system, that is not capitalism. You know why? In a capitalist system, if we want to do a deal and you don't like it, you can walk away. If I want to hire you or you want to hire me and I don't like the price, I don't like the working conditions, I can walk away. The way the Belgians did colonialism in Congo, if you didn't want to finish the job, they would chop your hand off. That's not capitalism, that is oppression. And that is all that the Congo had in one form or another for almost the whole time for the next century. So it remains a bitterly impoverished place. South Africa did not have capitalism. We had robber baron colonialism under the British. Then we had race nationalist fascist apartheid under the white supremacist combination of English and Afrikaans rule. And as a result, if you look at the GDP development of South Africa compared to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, we were in a much better position in this country in the 1920s. We could have been much richer than Canada today. But apartheid, I mean, it was a very stupid and evil system. It was evil for oppressing black people. It was also stupid because it made everyone, including whites, poorer than they would have been without apartheid. It's a strange thought, but the facts are very clear, and the economic research is very clear. Apartheid was not capitalism, and it was bad for making money. It repressed the market. It's making it hard for black talent to add value. What does that mean? That means there's less value. That means there's less of a market to sell into. It's harder to sell overseas because there's sanctions. It's a very, very stupid system. So, and a lot of countries have had something like robber baron colonialism or apartheid in Africa. So in some sense, Africa's problem is that people who want to start a business sell something to their neighbor, sell something to their community. They see a plan, have almost never had a chance. If someone wanted to rob them, there was no police to protect them. Rather, the police would come and rob them because the police were working for foreign invaders or some corrupt faction with some ideology. And after a century of that, it is no surprise that the results have mainly been bad. But if you look in places where a chance has been given, in Kenya for the last few years, in parts of Nigeria that aren't bedeviled by terrorists, in parts of Senegal, parts of Uganda, Zambia, you know, there are moments of peace and safety and a relatively, a government that wants to protect small businesses. And then you see African capitalists, African entrepreneurs finding ways to make their neighbors' lives better. The neighbors pay them, they get the money, the business grows. and it's a win-win situation. So that formula works here as well as it works anywhere. It's just been given less of a chance here, I think. And just to be clear, that is not a formula for capitalism without government, without regulation. It's a formula for capitalism with government protecting businesses, particularly protecting small businesses. Big businesses, you only have one guy to deal with. Then it's very easy to be corrupt between the government and that one big business, or those 4 big businesses. But with small business, there's many, and they compete and they provide, and they are close to their communities. They know what is really wanted. When government protects small business, that form of capitalism, if you want to call that capitalism, then I think people really do well in terms of poverty measures, how long people live, how healthy they are, how educated, and so on.
Of course, I asked you capitalism. Now I'm going to flip the question. So why has communism failed in many parts of the world? Secondly, if it has failed in many parts of the world, why South Africa's radical left think that it will succeed here?
Communism is a beautiful idea.
Oh, you think it's a beautiful idea?
It is a beautiful idea.
Okay. Wow.
It's December now, my favorite month. I will see my family. We will have Christmas together. When we have Christmas together, it's like communism. The phrase in communism is from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. If one of my cousins is small, he will get a little bit of food on his plate. If one of my cousins is very big, he will get a lot of food on his plate. If someone is tired, we will take care of them. If someone has lots of energy, we will take care of them. That is communism. And it is a good way to be in a family. You give each other whatever you need. You support each other in whatever way you can. The reason communism doesn't work is that a country is not a family. The way you know your family members, you can never know one another in a country. The way you love each other. I love South Africa. When I watch the Springboks win, I'm very happy. When we have a peaceful election, it makes me weep with joy. But I do not have the same connection as I do with individual members of my family that I know face to face. So what happens when you have that family love, but at a national scale? 2 things. One is, once you're at a national scale, there are always guns. Or if it's not guns, it's spears, or it's aeroplanes with bombs, or whatever. Every country is a domain where some state has monopolized the legitimate use of force. So a communist government, unlike a family, is an armed unit of violence. And so where you have trust and this thing of family, but suddenly you're having Christmas dinner and we all have guns pointing at each other, that's a very, very different dynamic. And the second thing is, where it is very large, it covers not just the good times, which is Christmas, it covers every day of the week where you're supposed to go to work. Now, I love my family, but I do not work with my family. And when I work with people, I do not work with people the same way that I have holiday with my family. At work, I must be serious in a very different way.
Yes.
And it is more structured. And communism breaks those structures. And what structures do I mean? Merit. You get paid for how much you add, not for how much you need, for how much you add. And if you need more, then you better add more. That's it's tough, and it makes you excited to go and try harder. That system is good for work. It is not good for family. And when communism confuses those two and gets very big, it makes inefficient work, too much love in the workplace. And when it's not really love, it becomes very violent. And as a student of the Soviet Union, as someone who's visited Russia, as someone who's been in the archives, I've spoken to people who've been to Gulag. I've spoken to people who have been the victims of communist guns and prisons and so on. It is very clear that freedom is not consistent with communism. So then why is it tried here? Because we live in the past, not individually. When we hang out individually, we're trying in South Africa. Many people are trying very hard, get jobs, keep their jobs, make families, fall in love, fight, love, whatever it is. We're moving. We movers and shakers, actually, especially here we are in Johannesburg. It's a very energetic city. But in terms of our political class, the sins of apartheid were so great, the shadow that it cast is so deep, that we still think as if it's 1980. We still think as if we need to overcome the problems of the 1980s. And that is how you hear the rhetoric. I mean, some ANC leaders in the second last election were saying, if you don't vote for the ANC, apartheid will come right back and so on. So because people are thinking in that historical context, they haven't yet learned what happened at the end of the 80s, as predicted by Fukuyama, is that communism collapsed. Even in China, China is not communist. They privatized half of their real estate, half of their stock market, and all of their real estate. They very much privatized their economy, and 800 million people were lifted out of poverty. They are really a very totalitarian regime of a different sort. So anyway, communism failed, and the news hasn't sort of reached the ears of the radical left in South Africa. It's unfortunate, but it is understandable. It is understandable given how severe the trauma was that people are trying to grapple not just with today's issues, but with yesterday's issues, that things get confused. But on the other hand, as we started this conversation with the unraveling of the left, the separation of the radicals from the moderates, I think the moderates are in a better position today than ever before to say, okay, look, we don't want to be communists. We do want to help the poor, but we don't want to do it that way. Yes. And I think as that becomes more of a thing you hear and see people try and do, politicians try and do, people will find it easier to say communism is actually a bit of a historical thing. It was interesting in the 20th century. It killed 100 million people. Let's not do that extreme thing, but let's look for what are the reasonable ideas that are actually workable, that maybe have some of that impulse of trying to care, but that are focused by what really works rather than what feels good, which is hard, but that's maturity. Hey, this country's maturing, and that's what it means. It means getting serious about results rather than just feelings.
So far in our discussion, we have spoken a lot about the differences between capitalism and socialism or communism, and what is the appropriate economic ideology between the two for growing our economy. Some political economists and philosophers have argued that South Africa must study the so-called third way or Nordic model practiced by Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. The Scandinavians are not socialists or communists, as some people suggest they are. The Scandinavians have built globally competitive free market economies with comprehensive welfare systems that provide social security for their citizens. Take Denmark, for example. Education and healthcare are virtually free. This has ensured that the Danes are highly literate and healthy. Average life expectancy in Denmark is 82 years. In South Africa, life expectancy is 62 years. The Danes live 20 years longer than we do. Do you think as South Africans we must explore the third way? And what would it take for us to build such a model which could make our country a paradise?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, and we should be aiming for something like Denmark.
Yes.
I think aiming high is the right way to go about this. But you have to be realistic about your time frames.
Yes.
You can't be like Denmark tomorrow or next year or in 10 years. So if you want to say Denmark in 50 years, great. Then you must say, what does that mean to aim at for 10 years, 20, 30, 40?
Yes.
The second thing is to say, where are we now? And on paper, we are already Denmark. So you mentioned universal healthcare and universal education, basic education. We have both of those in South Africa. In the Constitution and in the laws. There's supposed to be schools for everybody. There's supposed to be hospitals for everybody. And we've got, like Denmark, we've got companies and all of those things. So on paper, we are Denmark, but it's not working. In reality, it is not working. So then the question is, how do we turn that around? And I suppose the radical right-wing answer is to say, you know what, we should just cut it out. The schools aren't working. And they're not working, hey? Just to give you some sense of the figures, South Africa's public education is, it's one of the worst in the world on a bang for buck basis. So out of 180 countries measured on how much they spend and how much are you getting out of it, we've got the worst intersecting measure. And if you look at 120 countries that were measured for literacy and numeracy, we've got the worst and the fifth worst results in last year's studies. So this is a major problem. And the solution can be to just cut it out. No more money for those schools. And if you're poor and you can't afford to send your children to school, they must play in the streets. I reject that option. You can say for the hospitals, they're not working. People get mugged in hospitals. They die in hospitals waiting for years and years to get treatment. Well, just cut the money to the hospitals, rather they must die in the streets. I reject that. The left-wing option says we must increase the spending, tax more. I reject that too, because you cannot tax South Africans more realistically. If you increase the tax rate, rich people will hide their money in Switzerland or Abu Dhabi or the Isle of Man more successfully than they're already doing. And poor people literally can't afford to be paying more. You're going to be adding to the hunger issues. You're going to be adding to the transport issues of people trying to find work. It's unworkable. So what we can do is take the money we're already spending, but spend it better. That's the model. And how do we do that? I think the most underutilized resource in South Africa are the brains sitting inside 30, 40 million adults in this country. Parents in this country, almost everyone knows better what is good for their child than some government officials sitting in Tshwane Union Buildings offices. So what does this mean in practical terms? Instead of the union buildings trying to run every school, 3,000 schools in the country, you should say to a parent, here is 2,000 Rand a month in a voucher, a scholarship, a bursary for your child. Either that is the amount we're spending for that child to go to that school, but if you want to send that child to another school, send your child to that school and we will send the 2,000 Rand. Then if someone wants to build a school in some part of rural South Africa, in some township, in some city, in some CBD, in some suburbs, because they say, you know, the local school here is not working so well, some of the parents want to send their child to another place, they want to use these vouchers. You can build that school and the vouchers will be there to pay for it. If the school is working, the parents will keep their children there. But if the school has been overtaken by one of those headmasters who is very concerned about the tuck shop and how much money can he make that side, and is not very concerned about whether the teachers are arriving on time on Monday and leaving on Friday without some, Puza Friday kind of story. If he's disciplined or she is disciplined and putting structure in the school and the kids are getting a good education, the parents will keep the children there. If not, the parents can move the children. So what are you leveraging? You're leveraging the brains of the parents to make the decision. What's working, what's not working. That has been tried in India, in Nigeria, in the United States, in South America. And studies show grades shift by a standard deviation, even 2 standard deviations. It's like taking children getting 50%, 60%. You give a school system like that 10 years, now they're getting 70%, 80%. That means they're getting good enough grades. They can go to university, study mathematics, study accounting, get nice jobs, get the kind of lifestyle where they can take care of their parents, they can take care of their own children at the level where they're not even going to a public school. They can be investing. This is how you become Denmark. That is how Denmark became Denmark. Not particularly with the voucher system, but by allowing parents to manifest their own choices with a greater degree of control. Freedom really is a beautiful thing, not just because of respect, but also because these computers over here are extremely useful if you give them a chance. If someone in Pretoria is deciding everything, you don't get to decide. If you get to decide, the same for healthcare, you get a voucher. You can decide this clinic or that clinic. You can, if there was vouchers for healthcare, if the local government hospital was giving a delay on the cancer treatment, you could find some government hospital or some private hospital that will do the treatment in time for you to live. The money's already there. It's just the decisions are not there because we are letting a few people make decisions for many people. Let many people make decisions for themselves. That is the principle of liberty, of freedom. That is the principle we espouse. We think it works at work. It works at play. It works in love. And it also works for service delivery. If you let people participate in that choice, they will make a better choice than if they're being forced one way or another by some bureaucrat. And again, just the studies, seriously, people shouldn't just believe me for the sake of listening to pretty words. If you look into this thing and how it's been tried in other countries, I think the results will speak for themselves. And if we could do that for South African children today, for millions of South African children, give them a better chance, we would be unlocking the greatest next generation potential, which is those brains, those minds, those living, breathing computers who are people. I'm not just trying to say we're machines, but in terms of work, it's a great thing to think. And that is what education is. It unlocks your power to think at even higher levels. So it's a pathway that will take decades. If you do this thing now, it'll improve a little bit now. But that's not going to get us to Denmark, not tomorrow. But if you let that play over 2 or 3 generations, the child who gets a better education and can become an accountant, then his child is growing up with that chance to have pocket money from his parents, to start his own business and a network that he knows very nicely. Then he can be 100 millionaire, Then his child can be a billionaire, kind of a thing. This is at scale. It really is the way that wealthy countries become very wealthy.
Let's now bring it back to South Africa. Our economy has been stagnant for the last 15 years, and in that period, unemployment has skyrocketed. What is causing low economic growth and high unemployment in South Africa?
One measure is gross fixed capital formation, which is an economist's fancy term for investment, for savings, for people taking money, not eating the money, not wearing the money, but using the money to build bricks, to buy equipment, to... What are you doing? You're using money to make more money. There's not been a lot of that. If you look at that curve, the ANC plan was to have 30% of the money of total GDP, of total annual product, go into gross fixed capital formation. And they said if you have that, if you've got that 30%, for 20 years, you'll take South African unemployment right down to levels like South Korea or a country you want to be like. We are at 15%. So that's half. But if you look at, the ANC was aiming at 30. Yes. If you look at the actual countries that have been succeeding, they are at 35. And I'm talking about poor countries, like Vietnam is much poorer. Vietnam is 3 times poorer than us per person. But they are at 35% investment out of every rand that they create every year. 35% of it gets saved to be put into making more money the next year. So if you look at the rate of growth, by 2045, they're going to be twice as rich as us. So wouldn't you rather be more like that? We are like this. We are flatlining and declining per person. South Africa had more money per person in 2010 than it does today. There are very few countries that have gone backwards like that. And the reason is we're not saving. Why are we not? People want to save. Why can't they save? 10% of the costs in South Africa go to security. In most countries, more like 2-3%. Here, you have to, if you are in a nice suburb, in like Sandton or something, electric fences, armed security guards, that kind of thing. If you go to, I've done a lot of research in townships, small businesses there. It's like, what are you spending money on? Well, half the money I'm spending on is between the dog that I have to feed to try and keep some criminals from stealing my guineas or whatever, and the other half of the money is to pay back the loan from when all of my stuff was stolen. Someone running a spaza shop, all their stuff gets stolen, then they have to try and start the business over again. This kind of thing is far too common in this country, and it hits entrepreneurs at every level of the spectrum. That's part of it. Then another part of it is the government stealing money, which everyone knows about. Yeah. And another part of it is, I must say, laws that kind of chase away money. So when I criticize something like BEE, and we talked about it earlier, some people like it, some people don't like it. It's a thing to be debated in good faith. One of the things to worry about, whether you like it or not, is what if someone is sitting in America or China or Japan or India or Nigeria? Nigeria's got money, hey? What if someone there wants to invest in South Africa? And the government says you can invest, but we want you to sell 30% of the company to a stranger. You know, that investor might very well think to himself, I'd rather go to Botswana. Botswana's growing faster than South Africa. I'd rather go to Kenya. Kenya's growing faster than South Africa. They're not telling me that kind of story there. It's my business. I want to own my whole business. So then the money doesn't come, because money, big money flies very, very quickly. And it flies away faster than you can even sign the law. Just saying we're thinking about this law can chase the money away. So some of the laws have been quite hostile to investment. And if you combine that with the crime, you combine that with poor service, state capture, with this effect of the roads crumble and it's hard to do the logistics. Those things all together add up to very low fixed capital formation. And the next generation pays the price, because this generation has been kind of able to take advantage of the infrastructure, the factories that were already built in the 2000s and the 90s. But now what are we building in the 20s to help those in the 30s and 40s who will be entering the workforce at that stage? What factories are being constructed now so that they will have a chance to be productive? Or what retail centers, or what service centers? Not nearly enough. And so the biggest resultant problem is unemployment.
If we were to remove infrastructure bottlenecks and cut excessive red tape that make our country less appealing to investors, where should investors be investing in our economy to get good returns?
It's a good question. If you cut the infrastructure bottlenecks, I think that a lot of investors would quickly climb into construction. South Africa's infrastructure is pretty good. South Africa's light manufacturing and heavy manufacturing are probably, in the medium term, the kinds of sectors that I think investors would be very eager to climb into. Just briefly, if you look at South Africa's manufacturing sector, our real factories and stuff like that, it has declined relative to the size of everything else precipitously since the late 2000s. The only thing that hasn't declined is food processing. So, you know, coup beans and sausages and that kind of thing. We're still in Africa just about the best at that, because we've got good farming, and then we've got factories that work and can deal with those goods, and then you export it or you consume it domestically. What we should be doing is growing manufacturing. And we can do that for the same reason that sector is still surviving, which is that we've got natural resources. We've got a lot of platinum group metals. We've got the capacity with coal to make good quality steel. And we've got access not just to local potentially growing markets, but to markets across the region. If you had more energy, so you remove the bottlenecks, what does it mean? It means right now, if you grow the economy, we're going to have load shedding again. So if you remove the bottlenecks, the first thing would be adding energy. So people would be building more energy power. The next thing that would come after that would be more steel refineries, more mines, and more light to heavy manufacturing, to get us back in the position where we're making more cars. It's like we make a few Mercedes and a few Hummers, and those numbers have been dwindling. But this is the kind of country that could be the motor vehicle manufacturing hub of electric vehicles or whatever in the 2040s. But it's going to take time to get there. The first thing is going to be the light and the medium, and the energy. And the reason I say those rather than services sector is that in the services sector, South Africa's financial service, banking, insurance, pension fund management, and stuff like that is extremely advanced relative to countries our size. Our bankers make a lot of money and they do a lot of good work. So I don't think that's going to be the first place to add more. And retail, similarly, it's like we are quite developed there. It's more in the muscle power kind of region that I think we've got room to grow. And the other side of that, part of what I think is good about it, is South Africa's skills base right now is not competitive in terms of, are we producing masses of great corporate lawyers that can outcompete London in terms of turning this place into that kind of center of corporate finance? No. Our education base isn't there yet. And you've got to learn to walk before you can fly. So while we're learning to walk, the place to go is manufacturing, where it's brain power and muscle power working together. That's the kind of skill you can get from, welding, learning it at a technicon. This is the kind of thing that is seriously achievable for this generation if we start turning it around. So growing those job opportunities together with growing those capital investments, that's the marriage of both sides, capital and labor, that I think is potentially very fruitful here.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. I'd like to thank Gabriel for sharing his insights with us. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on our socials so that you don't miss an episode. I am Xolani Mlangeni. See you next time.